My name is Jack, and my life is the embodiment of the American dream. Well, or American routine, depending on how you look at it. A house in the suburbs, a beloved wife, Sarah, a full fridge, and baseball on weekends. Everything seems perfect, but sometimes you just want to shake things up, do something crazy. Apparently, that's why my phone rang on that fateful evening. "Hello, Jack, dear, it's Maggie." My mother-in-law's cheerful voice sounded on the phone. I involuntarily tensed up. Calls from Maggie usually didn't bode well. Last time, she dragged me into a venture of growing organic zucchini. Trust me, you don't want to know the details. "Hi, Maggie, what's up?" I asked cautiously, mentally preparing for the worst. "I have a surprise for you. Remember that old tandem bike Henry and I used to ride in our youth? I dug it up in the shed. Of course, it's all rusted and covered in dust, but it's a rarity. So I thought maybe you could take on restoring it. I can just imagine how romantic you and Sarah will look riding it along the embankment." I sighed in resignation. Well, here we go again. But on the other hand, the prospect of tinkering with the technique and impressing my wife looked tempting. And when else would I have the opportunity to play hero in the eyes of my beloved mother-in-law? "Okay, Maggie, I'm in. When should I come?" I replied readily, already thinking about what tools I would need. "Even tomorrow I'll be waiting, my night on a rusty bicycle." Maggie laughed and hung up. "Well, it looks like my summer promises to be eventful. The main thing is not to blurt it out to Sarah. Let it be a surprise. I just hope old Maggie doesn't decide to keep me company in this adventure. A tandem is a tandem, but not to that extent." The next morning, armed with a set of tools and optimism, I went to Maggie's summer cottage. Sarah only shrugged when I said I was going to help her mom with repairing the shed. Apparently, she was already used to Maggie and my strange ventures. "The main thing is don't overdo it there, honey," my wife instructed me, kissing me goodbye. "I know you and Mom, once you start making something, you can't stop." I assured Sarah that I would behave myself and not smash the shed to smithereens. Although, given Maggie's love for adventures, nothing could be ruled out. When I arrived at the place, Maggie greeted me with open arms and a sly twinkle in her eyes. She was clearly up to something, and my intuition told me that it would not be limited to simply repairing the bicycle. "Jack, dear, I'm so glad to see you," she exclaimed, almost dancing with excitement. "You just can't imagine what memories came flooding back to me when I saw this bike. So many happy moments were associated with it." And Maggie launched into vivid descriptions of her turbulent youth, and I could only nod, trying to keep up with the flight of her imagination. I must say that some of the details were frankly shocking. I never would have thought that my mother-in-law was such a wild one in her years. Finally, we got to the shed where the legendary bicycle was waiting for me. It was a real monster, rusty, bent, with peeling paint and warped spokes. I couldn't help but whistle. "Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done here." "Well, Jack, can you handle it?" Maggie winked at me, patting me on the shoulder. "I'm sure you have golden hands. It's not for nothing that Sarah is crazy about your talents." I felt myself blushing. That old fox. She always manages to embarrass me with her ambiguous jokes, but there was nowhere to go once you take up the yoke. "Of course I can handle it, Maggie. It's not the first time," I replied cheerfully, rolling up my sleeves. "Hand me that socket wrench over there. We're going to work miracles." And we got to work. More precisely, I mostly worked, and Maggie mostly distracted me with conversations and memories. But I must admit, time flew by unnoticed in her company. We laughed, joked, remembered the past, and I suddenly caught myself thinking that for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive and happy. The work on the bicycle dragged on. It turned out that bringing this monster into a presentable state was not an easy task, but I didn't give up. I persistently twisted the nuts, lubricated the chain, straightened the spokes, and Maggie didn't leave my side for a moment, supporting my fighting spirit and encouraging me with apt comments. "Wow, Jack, you have a real talent," she admired, watching my manipulations. "It's not for nothing that Sarah says your hands are capable of much." I grinned. Well, of course, where would we be without the signature jokes from my beloved mother-in-law? Although, to be honest, her words warmed my soul. It's nice to know that you're valued and respected. Gradually, our conversations became more and more personal and frank. Maggie talked about her marriage, about the happy moments and difficulties that she and Henry had to overcome. And I shared my worries, doubts, fears. Surprisingly, it was easy for me to talk to Maggie about everything in the world. "You know, Jack, sometimes I miss real passion so much," she suddenly confessed, looking thoughtfully into the distance. "That spark, that fire that Henry and I had in our youth. Now everything has somehow faded, become stale." I involuntarily shuddered. Our conversations were becoming too frank. But at the same time, deep down, I understood Maggie. I myself had caught myself thinking similar thoughts more than once. Our eyes met, and it was as if an electric charge ran between us. The air suddenly thickened, tensed, filled with some strange energy. I swallowed, feeling my pulse quicken. Could it be? "Maggie, I began, but she interrupted me, covering my hand with hers. "Shh, Jack, no need for words." "I understand everything," she whispered, and mischievous sparks danced in her eyes. And then something happened that I did not expect at all. Maggie leaned toward me and kissed me, passionately, hotly, as if trying to quench a years-long thirst. For a moment I was taken aback, but then I returned the kiss, feeling the flame envelop my body. My mind switched off, giving way to primal instincts. We kissed like crazy, tearing off each other's clothes, studying, exploring, striving to become one. Reality ceased to exist. Only our entwined bodies and the mad, all-consuming desire remained. It was the brightest, most exciting experience of my life. With Maggie, it was as if I was born again, discovering previously unknown facets of pleasure. We made love so selflessly, as if it were the last time. But everything comes to an end. Having dissolved in each other to the last drop, we were finally able to catch our breath and look the truth in the eye. And this truth turned out to be bitter. "God, Jack, what have we done?" Maggie groaned, hiding her face in her hands. "How could we do this to Sarah?" It was like a bucket of ice water had been dumped on me. Right, Sarah, my beloved wife, whom I had just betrayed in the most vile way. What kind of person am I? "Maggie, listen." I tried to hug her, but she pulled away. "Let's just forget about it, okay? Let's pretend it never happened. It didn't mean anything, right?" Maggie laughed bitterly through her tears. "Of course, Jack, it was just a mistake, a momentary weakness. We must keep it a secret for Sarah's sake." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. For Sarah's sake, for the sake of our family, for the sake of preserving at least some semblance of a normal life. But my God, how difficult it was. The rest of the day passed as if in a fog. Maggie and I tried hard to pretend that nothing had happened. She bustled around in the kitchen preparing dinner, and I continued to tinker with the bicycle, trying not to look her in the eye. The tension between us could be cut with a knife. Every glance, every accidental touch seemed to burn the skin, reminding of the recent intimacy. I was ready to sink through the ground with shame and embarrassment. At dinner, we barely exchanged a couple of phrases, avoiding talking about the elephant in the room. Maggie told some funny stories from life, and I mechanically agreed, not delving into the essence. When it was time to go to bed, the awkwardness reached its peak. We froze opposite each other, not knowing how to behave. "Well, good night, Jack," Maggie squeezed out, nervously fiddling with the edge of her robe. "Good night, Maggie," I responded, feeling my face flush with color. I went to the guest bedroom and collapsed on the bed without strength. Thoughts swarmed in my head, giving no rest. How could I have stumbled so? How could I betray Sarah, break my wedding vows? And most importantly, why the hell did it feel so good with Maggie? I tossed and turned half the night, unable to close my eyes. Memories of the past day, hot, vivid, desperate, stirred the blood, not allowing me to relax. I didn't even notice how my hand slid under the blanket, caressing and arousing my body that was yearning for affection. Only in the morning did I fall into a restless sleep, full of colorful and sensual images. And all of them, one way or another, were connected with Maggie. When I woke up, the sun was already high. The house seemed unusually quiet and empty. I wonder where Maggie is now. She was found in the kitchen, fussing over breakfast, humming some cheerful melody to herself. Seeing me, she smiled, but somehow hesitantly, as if not knowing how to behave. "Good morning, Jack. How did you sleep?" she asked, handing me a cup of coffee. "Honestly, lousy," I sighed, plopping down on a chair. "Maggie, we need to talk." "About what happened yesterday." She tensed, but nodded, sitting down opposite me. "Listen, I don't know what came over me," I began, nervously crumpling a napkin. "It was madness, an impulse, a momentary weakness. But we shouldn't—" "I know, Jack," Maggie quietly interrupted me. "Believe me, I myself am shocked by what happened. I love Henry, I love Sarah, and I never wanted to hurt them." I exhaled with relief. So I'm not the only one tormented by remorse. Maggie also understands that we've done something stupid. "So what do we do now?" I asked helplessly, looking into her eyes. "Pretend that nothing happened," she replied resolutely. "Bury this secret in our hearts and move on, for the sake of our families, for the sake of ourselves." I slowly nodded. Yes, perhaps that would be the right thing to do. Pretend that nothing happened. Forget about the mad passion that flared up between us, and never ever think about what happened again. But my God, how difficult it was, especially when Maggie came up to me and gently touched my cheek in farewell. This gesture was so tender, so intimate, that it took my breath away. "Goodbye, Jack," she whispered, and in her eyes I saw a reflection of my own longing. "And thank you for everything." And then she went out into the garden, leaving me alone with a broken heart and a sense of guilt gnawing at my soul. How am I supposed to live with this burden now? Returning home, I tried my best to pretend that everything was fine. I smiled at Sarah, joked, talked about how great Maggie and I worked on repairing the shed. I wisely kept silent about the bicycle. It's a surprise, after all. But inside me, it was as if a black hole had formed. I constantly thought about Maggie, about our crazy affair, about those bright emotions that we experienced together. The memories burned, tormented, gave no peace. I began to stay at work more often, avoid intimacy with Sarah. It seemed to me that my infidelity was written on my face, that my wife was about to find out everything. But she only looked at me in surprise and asked if everything was all right. "Of course, honey, I'm just tired," I would reply habitually, kissing her on the cheek. "You know how busy I am at work." And I was only thinking about how Maggie was doing now. Was she suffering as much as I was? Did she remember our hot embraces, our passionate kisses? Or had she already thrown me out of her head, focusing on her marriage? Several times I had the urge to call her, to write to her, but at the last moment I would stop myself. No, I can't. We agreed to forget about everything, not to reopen old wounds, not to destroy what can still be saved. But I couldn't forget. No matter how hard I tried, Maggie had firmly settled in my thoughts and dreams. I saw her everywhere, in random passers-by, in the heroines of movies, even in my own reflection in the mirror. It was driving me crazy. I felt like I was going crazy. And there was nothing I could do about it. Only working on the bicycle brought at least some relief. I would spend hours in the garage, painstakingly assembling and sorting out parts, as if hoping to piece by piece restore my former life. When the two-wheeled monster was finally ready, I experienced a real surge of pride. Wow, I really did it. The old bicycle gleamed with new paint and shone with chrome, as if it had just come off the assembly line. "Well, darling, ready for a ride?" I asked Sarah slyly, solemnly wheeling the machine out of the garage. You should have seen her face. First bewilderment, then recognition, and finally, genuine delight. "Oh my God, Jack!" she gasped, throwing up her hands. "That's Mom's tandem, the very one she and Dad rode in their youth. How did you manage to restore it?" I grinned smugly. "Well, what can I say, baby? Your husband has golden hands." And unable to restrain myself, I added barely audibly, "And your mother will confirm it." Fortunately, Sarah didn't hear my ambiguous remark. She was too engrossed in examining the updated bicycle. And then we went for a ride, along the embankment, as I had dreamed. Only instead of my mother-in-law, my wife was sitting behind me, and it was strange, like a piece of a puzzle that doesn't want to fall into place. But I tried. I joked, laughed, enjoyed the wind in my face and the closeness of my beloved woman. And for a while, I even believed that everything could be as before. The illusion shattered when we returned. Sarah hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you, honey. This was the best surprise of my life. Mom will be thrilled when she sees the bicycle." Everything inside me went cold. Mom, Maggie, the woman with whom I betrayed my wife. How could I forget about her even for a moment? And at that moment I realized, nothing will ever be the same again. Even if Maggie and I never see each other again, even if I keep our secret for the rest of my life, A part of me will always remain there, in her embrace. But I have to move on. I have to be a good husband, a loving father. I have to try to atone for my guilt and earn forgiveness, even if Sarah never finds out what I'm guilty of. So I smiled and tenderly kissed my wife, putting all my love and remorse into that kiss. "I love you," I whispered, holding her tightly. And that was the truth. Despite everything, I loved Sarah. It's just that now there were two in my heart, and I would have to somehow live with that, but I'll manage. For Sarah's sake, for the sake of our family, for the sake of the life we built together. As for Maggie, well, she will forever remain my sweet sin, my beautiful mistake, the secret I will take to my grave. After all, each of us has secrets, right? And my secret now is love for two amazing women, so different but equally important to me. And I may not be a saint. I may have stumbled, made an unforgivable foolishness, but I'm still human. A person capable of loving, making mistakes, and learning from those mistakes. So not all is lost, and maybe someday I will be able to forgive myself and let go of the past. But for now, I have my family, my bicycle, and my memories. And that's already a lot. So pedal on, friends, and don't forget, sometimes it's better to resist temptation and stay faithful, even if you really want to. Although, damn it, how difficult it is, especially when the mother-in-law is a real bombshell. But that's a completely different story. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.